Hello and welcome to my Backgammon channel. Now maybe you're new to Backgammon or have been playing for a while and you've been to a tournament or enjoy watching it online and have been met with a multitude of marvellous and mysterious words and wondered what the heck are these players going on about? Well, time to heck no further, as in this lesson I'm going to talk you through some of the most commonly used backgammon words and expressions, and soon people will be wondering what the heck you're going on about. Also, let's put the bewilderment to bed and get started. So number one is one of my favourite backgammon expressions, and this is when you start the game with a 6-5, an opening roll, and you move from the 24 point all the way to the midpoint, crossing two quadrants of the board. Now we call this a lover's leap. It's escaping a back checker, it's moving another checker to safety, and it's just a great expression. And you know, in chess they have names for all the opening gambits, and in backgammon we really don't have many except the lover's leap with a 6-5. On the right hand side you can see some further expressions that I'm going to talk you through as we go along, and the bottom one, I should say, making a run through it, has a slightly different meaning. Imagine you started with a 6-4 and you played 24 to 14 and you could be hit back with a 2. So making a run for it means you run off the 24 point, but you leave an element of risk. Of course, if you get away with it, it's fantastic. If you don't, you have to go back to where you started. So there we are, number one. Number two, making a point, really fundamental in backgammon to try to make points to trap your opponent. Here we can see that white has played two checkers off the 8 point and two checkers off the 6 point. So he has made two new points. Key points we can say, or a made point, or making an inner board or a home board point. So the bottom right is white's home board and the top right is green's home board, and white is moving the checkers around the board anti-clockwise to try to get them all into his home board, whereas green is moving in the opposite direction clockwise to try to get them all into their home board. Now of course making more home board points is much better because we block our opponent, but also if we hit our opponent then fewer rolls re-enter from the bar. We can also talk about breaking a point. You can see here that the 8 point, two checkers have moved to the 7 point, and by doing that we have only left one checker on the 8 point and broken that point to make a new point. So there we are, number three, making the bar. So the bar is also a point, the bar point, and here white has started with a 6-1 and made the bar point, and there are two bar points. There is white's bar point that you can see there that is being made, and opposite that is green's bar point. Now this is the third best point to make after the 5 and the 4 point, and it also serves as a blocking point, because after making this, if green were to roll a double 6, those two checkers stuck back wouldn't be able to move anywhere. So it's always good to make points to block our opponent. Number 4, the golden point. Now the golden point is the 20 point or our opponent's 5 point. This term was coined by Paul McGrill in his excellent 1976 classic Backgammon, definitely a book worth reading. It's called the golden anchor, the golden point. Why is it golden? Well, it's simply the best point because it prevents two of our opponent's game plans. He can no longer prime us and he can no longer blitz us. I'm going to talk more about those a bit later. Also, that gives us a safe landing spot as white if we were to get hit, then when we can use that to land back on to safety. So it really is a long-term asset and is a point you should fight for. Now, as we saw before, the golden point or the golden anchor is also called an advanced anchor. And an anchor is simply a point made in our opponent's home board. Now, if it's on the 20 or the 21 point, then we call that an advanced anchor. If it's lower back on the 24 or 23 point, we call that a low or a deep anchor. And we really want to try to anchor up to protect ourselves from getting attacked or trapped. So an advanced anchor is a key strategic idea to follow through in the opening game. So we can also start by making a slotting play like so. So here, white has played one checker from the 6 point to the 5 and one down from the mid with an opening 2-1. So here white has slotted the 5 point. Slotting means you place a checker down on a point that you want to make on a subsequent roll. So here, if white is not hit back with a 4 or a 3-1 or a 2-2 or a 1-1, then he can make that 5 point next time. And of course, making a 5 point prevents our opponent from making the golden anchor himself. And also, there is very limited risk to the slotting play here, because even if green were to roll a number which hits us, then we can re-enter into green's home board with anything besides a 6, which is 35 out of 36 rolls. Number 7, splitting your back checkers. So in the early game, it's really imperative that you don't get stuck on the 24 point. And here, white has opened with a 5-4 and split the back checkers. And he's done that in an attempt to make an advanced anchor, to make the golden anchor with a 4 if missed next time. So we must always fight for the best points. And we differentiate between the minor split and the major split. So the major split would be moving that checker to the 20 point, for example. Whereas a minor split would be playing 24 to 23. If we opened with, for example, a 4-1, we make the minor split. Having the checkers on separate points just makes a lot more rolls work better for you. And you can go through those and see how many more rolls would make points when the checkers are split. Number 8, stacked points. We really want to avoid inflexible positions in backgammon. Now you can see here white has 5 checkers on the 6 point and 5 checkers on the 8 point, and we call these stacked points or heavy points or even candlesticks, as that's what they look like. It's not a good position to be in. Now there's no limit to how many checkers you can have on an individual point. You could have all 15 checkers on one point, in fact, but that would be a terrible idea as it massively reduces our flexibility. And the opposite of stacked points is stripped points, which again is very inflexible. Now there you can see the 8 and the 10 point only have 2 checkers on them. And that's not a good idea because, for example, if white were to roll a 4-2 here and make the 4 point, he would only leave 1 checker on the 8 point. And you can see opposite, if green were to roll a 4-2, he wouldn't need to leave any shots in return. So usually having only 2 checkers on a point is a bad idea. So we don't want too many and we don't want too few. The middle is a good area to aim for. We also talk about stripping the midpoint. So that means reducing our midpoint to only 2 checkers. Now this usually is a bad idea in the opening or mid game. Now this is because if green jumps off the anchor, leaves the anchor, if we want to hit, then we're going to expose ourselves on the midpoint. So by unloading or bringing checkers down from the midpoint, we have to be careful that we do not strip it. And here you see that red arrow means it's a big mistake to do so. We're going to talk more about that red arrow also later, so stick around. Now, if you see a checker by itself, it's called a blot. Now, blots are vulnerable to attack. So we try not to leave blots, particularly on both sides of a board. We can call them a lone checker or exposing a blot. And there you can see white has 3 blots strewn across the board. Now the danger with having a blot is it can be pointed on, as you can see here in this position. So green has rolled a 4-2 and done 2 great things with that roll. Hit us and sent us to the bar, and also made the second best point. So getting pointed on or being pointed on our head is not a good idea. Blots are vulnerable. Now here we can see a flexible position because we have builders or spares. So this really is the opposite to the stripped position we saw earlier. Now here we have 3 spare checkers on our 6-point, 7-point and 8-point, and we can use those as ammunition to make the 4-point, make the 3-point, point on green's head. So it's very valuable because we can use those builders effectively to make new points, extend our prime and not leave ourselves stripped. Now leaving shots. Now here white has played 2 down from the midpoint with a 4-3, but played quite loose by leaving 2 blots to be hit back. Now here, green can use an indirect roll, such as 6-2 or 6-3, there are some others, to hit us. Now an indirect shot means green would need to use both dice to make that hitting play. Also, if green were to, for example, roll a 4-5 and hit us from the 24-point, then that would be called a fly shot, hitting us from that far back. Now, sometimes we take a risk by bringing 2 checkers down, because if we are missed, then we can use those checkers as builders to make new inner board points. Make the 5, make the 4, for example. So here, playing loose does have a lot of benefits if missed, but we mustn't play loose on both sides of a board at the same time, because then we are just too vulnerable. So try to avoid that if you can. Now dancing. So here green has rolled a 4-5, which is unfortunately one of the 9 rolls that doesn't re-enter that back into white's home board. So dancing means you just stay on the bar and miss a turn. Now here white has the 6-point, the 5-point and the 4-point made, which Roberti called the rack. It's a very strong formation to have when you have the 3 best points made in your home board. Now of course you don't want to dance or fan, as they say, and then staying on the bar or the roof is even worse because you miss your turn. Here you can think about the entry numbers green would need to bring that checker back off the bar into play. Now here we talk about pick and pass. So pick and pass is when you hit a checker and then bring it to safety. So here you can see that white has moved a checker from the 6-point, hit, and then picked it up onto the 2-point. Now there's no real point in white leaving that checker on the 3-point to just be hit back by green with 11 rolls. There's also a variation we call hit and cover. So imagine that there was only 1 checker on the 2-point and white played the 3-1 by hitting and then covering the 2-point. So that would be called hit and cover. Double tiger. Now, double tiger was a term coined by Michihito Kageyama in his brilliant book, Opening Concepts. Now, this is an aggressive play where we hit 2 checkers in our home board. And the good thing this play of making the double slot, remember the slot is when we slot a point in our own home board, hoping to make it later, is that if we are missed, then we're in a very strong position to make those points. So it's a bold play in opposition to a safe play, but there are some definite benefits. It's a very strong move, hitting twice in our home board. It's called the double tiger. Now, crossovers. What do we mean by crossovers? Now, here you can see that the board is split into 4 quarters or 4 quadrants. Now, on the right hand side, we have the home board. So the bottom right is white's home board and the top right is green's home board. And the left side of the board is the outfield, where most of the action can take place as the checkers come into contact with one another. And the idea is to move our checkers around the board. So here white has made 2 crossovers by playing 6-2, moving from one quadrant to another quadrant. And this is really useful when you're trying to save a gammon or a double game, moving those checkers from quadrant to quadrant, okay, to try to get them all round. So we call that a crossover when we move from one quarter to another quarter. So now bearing in, now when we get to the end game, we want to move all our checkers into our home board to bring those checkers home. So this is called bearing in, when we move them from the outfield into our home board. And then once we have bared in, then we bear off. And that's when we take the checkers from our home board into the tray or off the board. And the first player that removes all the checkers from the home board wins the game. We can also talk about ripping off checkers or taking off checkers. So those are some other expressions. Now, dead checkers. This is a particularly morbid expression. Now, we don't want to have an excess number of checkers on our ace point. That's because we cannot move them any further. They're effectively out of the game. So it's a bit like a football team having one player sent off with a red card and then they have to play with 10 players. Here, by having 3 checkers on the ace point, we are just putting checkers out of the game. We also talk about killing a checker or burying a checker. And that's why this is red, because by moving 6-1, we are killing that checker. Now, of course, sometimes moving to the ace point is a good idea. And we call this a tempo play when we hit loose on our ace point. And we often do that as a distraction play or to gain momentum. So here, green is in a very threatening position. If you look at the front position, green has 4 builders that are threatening to make new points or threatening to hit white's blots. So here, by hitting with the tempo from 6-1, we take away half of green's roll. And unless he rolls a double, he's not going to be able to improve the board. So there we are. Sometimes hitting to the ace is correct, but too many is a bad idea. Now, lifting a checker is when we move a vulnerable checker to a safer place. And here, with the 1 or the ace, we've moved 3-2 to lift that checker to safety. There's no point in taking a risk and leaving shots here when we're winning the game. We make the blot safe, we safety the blot, we tidy up. Now, a goalkeeper is when we keep 1 checker back on the 24 point, as you can see in the top right. And we keep that back when we're down in the race, We stay back and we hope for a late hit. We're basically waiting for contact. You can see that kind of in a number of positions where green will bear in, roll something awkwardly, and then that goalkeeper will be quite useful in getting a late hit and turning the game around. Now, blitzing is a game plan which you will see a lot, and please check out my other videos on blitzing. So here, green has won the opening roll of 2-5 and split the back checkers, and white has responded with a very strong double 5 and hit both checkers, making 2 new points at the same time. So it's a fabulous response. So a blitz attack is where we just go on the attack, smash green's checkers off the board, play forward. And now green is going to have some trouble re-entering white's home board. White can bring down more checkers from the midpoint, hoping to keep attacking, keep blitzing, and close his board before green has managed to fully enter or anchor up. Lots of new expressions there. Hopefully you're keeping up. Now, another game plan is priming. And priming is when we have a number of points made next to each other. So you can see here, white has a 5-point prime. Now, a 6-point prime would be the best one because green cannot roll anything that would escape that. Here, there of course is one roll, 2-6, that green could play to jump or to leap for prime and escape. But everything else just leaves green stuck. So priming as a second game plan is very strong and often lead to a lot of gammons or double games. So you can see here that green is stuck or trapped or primed in, and white has a 5-point prime. Now, blitzing and priming are 2 really cool game plans, and there are some others that I've talked about in another video, so please check that out. Now, 27, getting doubled out. Now, you may have seen with a backgammon board, you get this doubling cube, which you can see on the top right. Either player can offer that, and here white should offer the double and green should pass or drop the cube. It's a big drop. White has cubed out green. He has shipped the cube, and this is a double action. There's many expressions around the cube, and check out my other videos on cubing basics and you'll learn a lot more about how to use that funky dice on the top right. 28. Now, double sixes is called boxes or boxcars. It's a big double. It's a monster roll because you get to move 24 pips, which is excellent. And you can see on the right there are some other names for rolls. Now, double 1, snake eyes, or more recently, the eyes of Shiva. And Paul McGrill came up with quacks for double 2 and snowflakes for double 5. So you might hear these expressions over the board or when listening to backgammon match commentary online. Now, 29 is a joker. A joker is when you get a killer roll, an absolutely fantastic, mind-blowing, mesmerising roll, which vastly improves your position and your game-winning chances. And here, white has rolled a double 6 and will, of course, move 2 checkers from the midpoint to the ace point, creating a closed board, a 6 prime, and putting another checker of greens on the bar. It's very strong. You may sometimes also hear an anti-joker, and an anti-joker would be the opposite of a joker. It would be a roll which would be terrible and completely destroy your position and your board. So an anti-joker really you want to avoid, and a joker you hope to get more often, of course. And finally, a blunder. So we've seen these red arrows before in some previous positions, and a blunder is just a big mistake. We also have an error, which is shown in green, which is a smaller mistake. And those numbers just refer to the equity lost. £80 in £1,000 or £40 to £80 in 1,000. Now, if you go into XG, if you use our Backgammon software, which I can recommend, you will learn a lot more about match equity. But you know, blundering are big mistakes. Try to avoid them if you can. If you do make blunders, don't worry about it. Even the best players in the world make blunders. Whoppers, double blunders, lots of names for these. Think about where you're going wrong and then try to improve. And finally, these are some more great names for terms and expressions that you might hear over the board. So I'm going to put a link to a glossary you can find online if you want to check these out. But I think this is the first visual glossary of its kind. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do, like, share, subscribe. See you next Wednesday. All the best. Thank you.